Some Ways to Die series, and before we get into it, I just want to mention real quick, it takes a lot of courage to lead worship on your own like that, and I know Kevin doesn't do it for recognition, but we need to recognize the fact that he just led worship on his own, and it was fantastic. God truly blessed us with him, and it blew me away. It was great worship, one-man band, so recognized. But we're continuing our Dumb Ways to Die series, and I love this little clip that we're playing before each message now, because it's like we're learning to flex our muscles of our faith a little bit, and we're learning not to avoid these ways that God says that are just the stupidest ways for us to die. They're the stupidest ways for us to fall away from Him, to lose our faith, to really just ruin our lives. That's really what this whole series is about, and as I was watching these clips that this group put together, I thought these little clips are just hilarious. They're great little segues because they really demonstrate that. We're really trying to flex the muscles of our faith a little bit and grow a little bit in our understanding, in our relationship with God. But this week for me was a very long week. You've heard the phrase, if you've ever been in the military especially, you've heard the phrase, hurry up and wait. You've heard that phrase before, right? I mean, anytime you deal, like if you go to the DMV, for instance, it's very much so a hurry up and wait kind of thing. Anything that tends to, for some reason, deal with the government things, I'll always be hurry up and wait. But this week for me has been hurry up and hurry. That's the way my week's been, hurry up and hurry. I had to move my office this week, which is never fun. I hate moving. Absolutely abhor moving, I had to fit everything else I do in my normal weekly schedule in the midst of all this moving. So I'm packing boxes, I'm trucking them back, from one office building to another, and getting things unloaded. I got just one or two people helping me out. By the end of the week, my back is sore. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I still had to do my normal routine ministry-wise. I still had to keep my business running. I still had to maintain a whole litany of things I was doing, write this message of all things. I had to actually prepare for this morning. So all this stuff I had to do. By the time the week was over, by the time I hit Friday, I was exhausted. I was just, my mind was numb. So I had to check out a little bit. So yesterday I took an opportunity to just check out. I just checked out. I actually went on a personal little retreat, we'll call it. And I took off and I went to Ohio for the day. And I didn't just go to be by myself. I went to a conference. But this was a very unique conference. It wasn't like a ministry conference that pastors sometimes go to. It wasn't like a leadership conference or a business conference that you might expect me to go to. This was a different conference altogether. One that I've never attended, one that I've always been interested in, and I finally had the opportunity to go. So I went to this conference. And the subject matter of this conference was, it was this. It was Bigfoot. And I'm in love with this. This is my new prized possession. This is actually, I have a little picture. This is a replica of the cast that was taken from Bluff Creek, California, by the gentleman in 1967 who shot this footage. Now, for those of you who don't know me and maybe you're visiting for the first time or don't really know my story, I had a little bit of a Bigfoot run-in at one point. We can talk about that later. It's not part of my notes for this morning, and I don't want to drag your message out too much longer than it already is. So I had a little run-in, so it's always been kind of like a passion of mine. For the past few years, it's been an obsession. My wife would call it an obsession. And but I've never had a cast. But they were offering these casts, and Mr. Bob Gimlin was there who shot this footage, and I got him to sign it. How cool is that? This is an 80-plus-year-old gentleman. He's not going to be around much longer, and he's from California. And when are you ever going to have that chance again? So I got to sign my cast. This will be out front if you want to see it. It's awesome. It's awesome, and it's legit, man. It's legit. Believe me or not, it's legit. I'm telling you it is. I told Barry earlier that sometime in the near future, whether it be me or somebody I know, or even just somebody random person, it's going to happen. There's going to be a proven, declarative event. And you'll all be apologizing that you laughed just now. Bigfoot is real. Well, the reason I bring up this conference I went to is in this state park called Salt Fork State Park out in eastern Ohio. And I went there and I got to listen to a few speakers speak on their research, speak on, it was actually a really cool speaker. He spoke about like the literary history of wild men and Bigfoot. It was really fascinating. It goes back to ancient times, even biblical references, which I never really connected, but it was fantastic, these presentations they made. But the keynote speaker was Mr. Bob Gimlin, the guy who took this footage. And one of the things he did, he just basically opened up for questions. And there was a myriad of people, young and old, who asked litany of questions. But one of the questions that really provoked me was a question somebody asked saying, anytime that there's video or pictures of a supposed Bigfoot, why are they always blurry? Why are they always shaky? Why can't we get just a crystal clear shot of a Bigfoot? What is wrong? And here's what Bob Gimlin said. He said, we never do our best work when we are rushed. We never do our best work when we're rushed. And if you ever someday are in the middle of the woods and you have a run into with something, even something that we know exists, say it's like a bear, okay? Say it's just a bear, and or even a deer for that matter, and it happens so quick. The opportunity to pull out your phone or a camera or a video camera or whatever you have on you is split seconds. And when it's something like this, something that's not supposed to exist, something that's not supposed to be real, and you see something like that, your mind isn't recognizing what it is, it doesn't make any sense in your head, it's even harder to focus on. He said when this happened, it was his partner who was filming, and he said his partner was shaking so much. You actually see it in the film footage. If you look up the Patterson Gimlin film footage, if you're interested in it, and watch it, what you see is this guy just he's shaking everywhere. He falls at one point because he's trying to chase this thing down, and the film footage is shaky all over the place. And the reason is because we get so excited and we rush so quickly that it never happens. But the thing that I noted from his message was that phrase, that statement, saying we never do our best work when we are rushed. You go to a portrait studio to get some pictures done, or you go to the zoo and take pictures of wild animals, and it's easy, right? Because they're sleeping back there, or you're just sitting still at a portrait studio. You're not moving very far or very fast. But in the wild, things happen quickly. And I found that fascinating to how it applies to our message this morning. We never do our best work when we're rushed. We live in a hurry up and hurry culture. We live in a world that is just always going, moving, going. Whether you're in school or you're at work or just go through your daily life, you know that life is always fast-paced. And today, it's even worse than it's ever been. It used to be that you used to, be somebody who did one thing and then you ran off to the second thing. Well, now we're a multitasking society. So now we're doing 2 or 3 things, and then we're running off to do another 2 or 3 things at one time. We're constantly trying to, do our jobs, and we're texting or on our phones, or maybe we're driving, and heaven forbid we're looking at our phone. We're doing way too many things at one time. And so we are really living in a hurry up and hurry culture. We're living in a culture that tells us we've got to move fast, we've got to get things done, we've got to react, we've got to be instinctive in our reactions, we've got to know how to react, we've got to react quickly, or we're going to miss the spot. The opportunity is going to pass us by. And before we know it, the actions we take, or the things that we say, weren't exactly what we had in mind, or weren't exactly the things that we had intended to say or do. You can take that picture down, by the way. You don't have to keep a Bigfoot picture. I think everyone's just going to be really drawn to it. It's essential that we slow down. It is essential to not only our health, to our emotional well-being, but also to our spiritual well-being and our faith and our relationship with God, that we slow down, that we take a breath, that we call time out, and that we focus on what we're really doing in every aspect of life. We cannot rush our relationships with God or with one another. We cannot hurry through them, or else they will never be as healthy as they should be. They will never be anything, even remotely close to what they should be. We all need a pause. We need an opportunity to calm down. We need a timeout. As I mentioned before, we're continuing our Dumb Ways to Die series, and if you have the passage, you can pull that passage out of Proverbs chapter 6. And throughout the series, we've been looking at this passage from Proverbs chapter 6 and going line by line, talking about the things that God hates. Solomon, who was one of the kings of Israel, was David's son, wrote this passage saying there are 6 things that God hates, so there are 7 things he detests. And line by line, there are things that we've talked about throughout the past 4 weeks. We've talked about being arrogant. We've talked about having haughty eyes and how we look down on people. We've talked about lying tongues and being people of honesty, and how that's important in all of our relationships, and how it's really foolish of us that we give in to this cultural need to just tell white lies and tell things false truths, things that aren't true. We talked a couple weeks ago about hands that kill the innocent. We talked about anger. We talked about rage. We talked about how God detests the way we treat one another. Last week, we spent a little bit of time talking about conspiring, or hearts that plot evil. We talked about how God hates what goes on in our minds, and how what goes on in our minds is more destructive sometimes than the things we actually do, and how we think about people, or think about the things that we believe no one really knows about. And just kind of in our own minds. This morning, I want to continue the series with this next line. The feet which race to do wrong. Feet that race to do wrong. And what's fascinating about this line, this statement, is that it seems really rather simple, right? God hates it when we run into doing wrong things. He hates it when we run into things quickly and we're the wrong choices, that we sin and we rebel against Him, right? That's what seems like the focus is. That it's all about the evil side. It's all about doing wrong things, about making wrong choices. That's what at least the English translation of this verse seems to suggest that Solomon's really getting at. But when I took a deeper look at this particular verse, some little nuances about the text really started to kind of boil to the surface. And what I noticed was actually, you can pull up the Hebrew words. These are the Hebrew words that make up this English sentence. And I don't expect you to know them. I took Hebrew seminary and I barely know them. I had to look them up. But what they translate to, there's 4 words. Those 4 words translate into feet, running or racing, quickly or with haste or with prejudice, and the word raw at the end there is evil. But if you notice, Hebrew is written backwards. So you're kind of reading the wrong direction than what you normally would expect. One of the ways that you can always tell what a Hebrew writer, one of the Old Testament writers, was trying to emphasize in his sentence is based on word structure. There weren't any punctuation marks or things that we had for emphasis, like underlines or bold print or italics or emoticons. We don't have any of those in ancient Hebrew. But what we do have is a very clearly written sentence, very carefully chosen words. And when the Hebrew writer wrote this, when Solomon crafted this sentence, he was focusing not so much on the word evil. He was focusing on the running, the racing, the getting that quick. Our reactionary tendencies is what he's trying to get at. If you look at the sentence, you have 4 words. 2 of the words are about running, or about moving quickly. The other 2 are ancillary on the ends there. The adjective there, or the adverb to describe running quickly in the middle, are the words roads and bahar. And putting those 2 words together makes it the focal point of the sentence. This is what Solomon's trying to get to. He's saying that what God really hates, He hates evil. We know that. Everybody knows that. God is good. God is love. God created the world. He said it was good. He is all good things. We know that God hates evil. He abhors evil. But what's new about this sentence is the fact that He really dislikes, it really breaks His heart when we run towards evil. When we intrinsically react towards evil. When we just respond to someone or something with evil. That is what Solomon is trying to get us to understand in this sentence. He's trying to get us to recognize, and if you also keep in mind, this sentence follows immediately after the one that talks about conspiring or plotting evil. So the juxtaposition of those sentences is basically to tell us that God doesn't like it when you plan evil, and He also doesn't like it when you intrinsically try to run into evil either. Both of those things are important to God, and He hates it. They're dumb ways to die to God. They're dumb ways to ruin our lives. In effect, He's trying to tell us to slow down. He's trying to tell us to think clearly. He's trying to tell us to be patient. He's trying to tell us to have a sober mind. in the story about Jesus' arrest, in the latter part of the Gospel, there's a story that's just fascinating to me, in that it's a perfect example of what Solomon's trying to do here with this little forward sentence. We know that in Jesus' arrest, evil is having a chance at God. That's really what's happening there, right? That's what we understand that to be. There's evil, or Satan, is the world, is getting its chance to take out God, to take out the Son of God, to kill God. It's having an opportunity to take him down. And that's awful, right? I mean, from our earthly minds, we know from a disciple's point of view, that's an awful thing to think about. That's a really disturbing thing to think about. But on the night that Jesus is arrested, it's fascinating to me that it's not him being arrested, it's not the approach of evil coming towards him that he speaks out about. When Jesus is arrested, he speaks out against somebody, but it's not the people who arrested him. Let's look at the story in John chapter 18. John chapter 18, this is what John writes on the night Jesus is arrested. He says, after saying these things, Jesus crossed the Kidron Valley with his disciples and entered a grove of olive trees. Judas, the betrayer, kind of like evil encompassed here, knew this place because Jesus had often gone there with his disciples. The leading priests and the Pharisees had given Judas a contingent of Roman soldiers and temple guards to accompany him. Now, with blazing torches, lanterns, and weapons, they arrived at the olive grove. Jesus fully realized all that was going to happen to him, so he stepped forward and to meet them. Who are you looking for? He asked. Jesus the Nazarene, they replied. I am he, Jesus said. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. As Jesus said, I am he, they all drew back and fell to the ground. Once more he asked them, who are you looking for? And again they replied, Jesus the Nazarene. I told you that I am he, Jesus said, and since I am the one you want, let these others go. He did this to fulfill his own statement, saying, I did not lose a single one of those you have given to me. Then Simon Peter drew a sword and slashed off the right ear of Malchus, the high priest's slave. But Jesus said to Peter, put your sword back into its sheath. Shall I not drink from the cup of suffering the Father has given me? Jesus is being arrested. He's being betrayed by one of his own. Evil incarnate is approaching. They have in their clutches on the Son of God. And so the rational mind in us would say that would be the thing Jesus would be responding to, right? That evil incarnate is finally getting its heyday. That evil incarnate is finally getting an opportunity to take out Jesus, the Son of God. But that's not what he stopped. That's not what he responds to. It's not that which he tries to speak into. He doesn't command Judas to just back away. He doesn't command the soldiers and the guards to leave him. He doesn't just slip off as he does in other parts of the gospel, kind of secretly and quietly amongst the crowd. He gives himself willingly to the approaching evil that's coming for him. But where Jesus speaks out, where Jesus commands somebody to stop what they're doing, is when Peter takes a sword. He instinctively reacts to what's happening, and he slashes the ear of one of this man named Malchus. Now we can't blame Peter. Peter's react. This is his rabbi. This is his teacher. This is his Lord. He acknowledged already who Jesus was, the Son of God. He acknowledged his identity. So he fully believes his job is to be with him through thick and thin. And so when these men come to take Jesus, he, in his earthly mind, says, I've got to react. I've got to stop this. I'm going to do whatever is necessary. And so he pulls out a sword and he attacks. He attacks the guards. He attacks these men. He attacks evil incarnate as he sees it. And that's kind of understandable. I think most of us would be in those shoes, right? I mean, if somebody was attacking somebody we love or hold dear, we would probably react a lot like Peter did. We may not cut off an ear, because that seems like hard to do. Cutting off someone's ear, that's pretty good aim. But you might push back a little bit at some point. And this is where Jesus says, stop reacting. He's telling Peter to slow down. Put your sword away. Jesus knows what is coming for him. He knows what he has to do. He knows why he's going to go through the suffering he's going through. But there's even a greater reason, I believe, that Jesus stops Peter. Jesus stops Peter because even though he knows he himself has to go through this suffering, Peter doesn't have to go through it. Not yet. It's not Peter's time. And if Peter's allowed to just violently react, if Peter's allowed to just continue with his instinctive reaction to what's happening to him, he just rushes off and responds to what's happening to his circumstances, how he responds to his circumstances the way he is, Jesus knows that the guards are just going to take him. The guards are just going to pummel him too. And maybe Peter's going to be crucified with him. And that's not what was part of the plan. That's not necessary. That's not what has to happen in this situation. And so Jesus commands Peter. He stops Peter from reacting, from rushing into anything. And he basically tells him to slow down. Think about this for a minute. Take a breather. Figure out what's going on. I like what Anne Voskamp once said. She said, in our rushing, bulls in a china shop fashion, we break our own lives. When we react to our circumstances, when we just rush into a reaction, when we respond to something quickly, we don't give it a whole lot of time to process, we don't have a chance to think it through or pray about it or really reflect on what we're going to do. What we ultimately do almost every single time we do that, every time we respond like that, ultimately we just destroy our own lives. We destroy our relationships. We ruin our jobs. We hurt our finances. We sever our marriages, our relationships with our children. Things fall apart in our life in ways unimaginable to us when we refuse to just take a step back and reflect on what we're really about to do. Think about what we're about to say. Think about what actions we're about to take. Pray through that whole scenario. If we fail to do that, we end up, like Anne Voskamp says, breaking our own lives. Breaking our own lives. Jesus never rushed into anything. Jesus was never impatient with anything. Jesus never just responded instinctively to anything. Everything Jesus did was calculated. Everything Jesus did was meticulous. Everything Jesus did was filtered and saturated with prayer, deep reflection, thought, and an understanding of the will of God. There's story after story in the Gospels about Jesus finding time in the midst of the madness and the chaos that must have been his life, finding time to be alone in prayer, to be in communication with his Father. There's a story in John chapter 6 where Jesus feeds the 5,000 people. Some of us who were in the Monday Night Bible study, we just read that story not too long ago. Jesus takes some loaves and some fish from a young boy nearby, and he blesses them and he multiplies them, and he feeds more than 5,000 men. So we're thinking maybe even up to 10,000 people if you multiply that out with women and children. There could be tens of thousands of people there. And he feeds them all with just a few loaves and a few fishes. And naturally, if you're there, that's quite an act, right? That's an impressive thing. And all of a sudden, that made Jesus kind of, a big deal in your mind. Well, in the midst of that story, the tail end of that story comes these two verses, John chapter 6, verses 14 and 15, where John says, when the people saw him do this miraculous sign, when he multiplied these loaves and fishes, they exclaimed, surely he is the prophet we've been expecting. And when Jesus saw that they were ready to force him to be their king, he slipped away into the hills by himself. And then later on in another gospel, in Luke's gospel, there's a story about Jesus healing a man with leprosy. And he's just he's plagued with leprosy. He's one of these untouchable people who's never been healed, and begging for healing. And Jesus heals him, and Jesus clearly instructs him, go to the temple, offer your sacrifice, offer the offerings you're supposed to offer because of the law, but don't tell anybody about what I did to you. Don't tell anybody about this miracle. I did this for you. This is supposed to be kind of like between you and me for now, because Jesus knows that if word gets out, that the mob's going to come. Everyone's going to want this healing, and they're going to try to force him, as they did before, to be his king, be their king. And so he tells this man not to say anything. But Luke tells us in his story, in verses 15 and 16, he says, but despite Jesus' instructions, the report of his power spread even faster, and vast crowds came to hear him preach and to be healed of their diseases. But Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. As I mentioned before, I've gone to like leadership seminars, leadership conferences, kind of things what ministers tend to do, business owners tend to do. And one of the things you are always taught in any type of leadership seminar or coaching or anything like that is that when the momentum is hot, you basically you keep going, you keep building, you do whatever it takes to keep that momentum growing. So from a leadership perspective, what Jesus does in these stories makes no sense. Because the momentum's building for him, right? He's got tens of thousands of people that are focused on him. There, that he's the center of attention. He should just be running with this thing. He should just be, keeping it going 24 hours a day. But in these stories, and in other stories like them throughout the Gospels, Jesus says, no. I need time to reflect. I need time to slow down. I need time to pray, most importantly. I need to think about what comes next. I need to really digest what the will of God is. So that I don't break anything. So I don't ruin what God's plans are. So I don't break my own life, as Anne Boskamp said. I need to be careful. Everything must be calculated. Every word I say, every action I take, everything has to be prayed over, thought of, reflected on. All of this in order to avoid that evil which Solomon talked about thousands of years prior. Needs to be saturated in prayer. Peter, who was the one who slashed off the guy's ear, decades later, he would write these words in his first letter, chapter 5 of his first letter. He says, be alert and sober minded. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. To be of sober mind just means to be in control. It means to have control over it. It means to have control over your mind, control over your heart. It means to have control over your actions. It means to be peaceable and precise, collected. It means to be calculated, thoughtful, careful. It means to be like Jesus. It means to take time, be patient. When we're tempted to react to something, when we're tempted to rush into an action or just say whatever comes to mind, we need to be disciplined, take a step back, and just really think things over. Saturate everything in prayer. Meditate over what we believe the heart of God is. And find a way through every action, every deed, every thought, every word to reflect the love and grace of Jesus Christ. That's ultimately what everything is. We can't do that if we're just rushing into it. If we're just reacting. If we're just instinctively reacting to whatever comes our way. I want to finish up with this story I read in the news this past week. Anybody hear about a teenager by the name of Ben Mosier? Anybody hear his name? Ben Mosier? He's from the Philly area, and he's a teenager, senior in high school. He's also the quarterback of his high school football team. He's incredibly smart to the top of his class. He's an attractive young man. In short, he's everything I wasn't in high school. He's got everything going for him that I didn't. Not jealous at all. Everything worked out. That's okay. But he's got it going for him. Everything's going as planned. But it's the senior year of high school, and he knows the senior prom is coming. And he knows that he can pretty much ask any girl to the senior prom, and they're pretty much going to say yes. He's got the whole package. He can do whatever he wants. Well, one day while he was playing football with his team, he was playing against their rival high school, and he happened to look over to the sideline, and there was this girl sitting on the bench of the opposing team's bench, and she was like one of the equipment managers or what have you. And he realized that he knew this girl. He realized that this girl was a girl that he knew when he was younger. Her name was Mary. And he met Mary back in elementary school when they were really young. And Ben, at the time, even at a young age, when he was like in first, second, third, fourth grade, Ben was outgoing. He was sociable. He was popular in school. But Mary, she was extremely shy. She was extremely timid and reserved. And Ben didn't really know why. Frankly, he didn't care. He was a young kid. Most young kids don't care about those things. All he knew was that Mary was always left out of things. And so he reached out to her, and he always tried to include her in his group of friends, and he always tried to make sure she was part of the action, whatever was going on in school. And long story short, they became really close friends over the years. Well, as things tend to happen when you're a kid growing up through school, friends go different directions, and Mary went to a different school. Her family moved, and ultimately her parents sent her to a school that had programs that were uniquely designed for Mary's needs. You see, Mary had Down syndrome. At the time, Ben didn't know that. He didn't know what Down syndrome was. He didn't know anything like that. He just knew that she was shy, timid, didn't really socialize as much. But Mary went to this school where she was in special ed programs and stuff like that, and ultimately ended up becoming like an equipment manager for a coach for a local high school that her dad coached. That was his job. He was a high school football coach. Well, when Ben saw Mary, a light bulb went off. He remembered that in 4th grade, when he was a young kid, he didn't know anything other than the fact that he just liked Mary, thought she was a really sweet girl, and he always worried about her. He didn't know that she had any special needs. But he knew that he just liked her, and he told Mary in 4th grade that he would take her to his senior prom because he didn't want her to be left out. He thought it would be the coolest thing because he saw his cousin going to his prom, and it seemed like a lot of fun to get dressed up and dance with your friends and celebrate at the end of the school year. And he was afraid that Mary would be left out of this if he didn't ask her, if he didn't invite her to go to the prom with him. He's only in 4th grade. He had like 8 years to plan this, but he promised Mary that he would take her to her prom. Well, 8 years go by and lives change, obviously. Ben's now older. He's a teenager. He's got the thoughts that a teenage boy's got going through his mind, and he knows that he can ask pretty much any girl to the prom. He doesn't have to remember this promise. He can ask whoever he wants. He can ask whoever might become the prom queen, to his prom to be his date. But Ben said that he remembered his promise, and it took him a few days. He honestly was humbled by saying, it took me a couple of days to really decide that I wanted to keep my promise. Because Mary apparently had never forgotten it. And he saw her over the other side of the field, and when they reconnected, apparently that was one of the first things she brought up, was this high school prom promise that she had remembered for 8 years. And, he's a high school boy, and he thought, oh boy, what am I going to do here? But he had the decision to make. Who was he going to take to prom? Well, this was his high school prom picture right here. This was Ben and Mary going to prom together. And they went to different high schools. They actually went to 2 different proms together. But Ben had a chance to reflect and think about what he was going to do. He could have just reacted and said, I'm the coolest kid in school. I can ask any hot girl I want. I can ask any girl I want to go to school, go to prom with me. But he remembered his promise. He reflected on his promise. And I don't know if he prayed over it, but it seems to me like he might have. And he felt compelled to maintain his promise. And so he took Mary to prom, which I thought was just a beautiful story and a really beautiful closing to this message. It's important that we think through what we're doing. It's important that we think through what we're saying. I encourage you this week to slow down and just take a breather. Whenever you're tempted to react to someone or to something, just take a mental time out, even if it's just for a couple of seconds. Breathe 2 or 3 breaths. Calm your heart down. And remember not only this promise, but remember the promise of God. Remember the promise of God that He loves you in spite of yourself. That His grace flows through you in spite of yourself. And that your sole responsibility in this world is to be the light and be reflective of the light and the truth of Jesus Christ. That's our responsibility. May that be the reflection of every word you say, every action you take. Let's close with a word of prayer.